Okay, we're talking about mailroom outsourcing and specifically in this segment, implementation. Welcome back, Nina Brown from Datamark and Barb Pellow. Thank you so much. Barb Pellow with InfoTrends and also Pellow Partners. Thank you both. So let's kind of get down and dirty with implementation. Barb, we'll start with you. Kind of what's, big picture, if you had to sketch it out, what does a buyer need to think about to kind of get off to a good start?
Well, I think it's not just the buyer. I think it's the buyer and the supplier that need to think about a number of things to get off to a good start. The first one is making sure that the expectation levels are properly set. And what that means is that the buyer and the vendor have communicated both on the goals and the objectives of the outsourcing engagement very succinctly and clearly so they have equal sets of expectations. The second thing is, we've all heard that old adage, you can't manage what you don't measure. You really need to sit down and set up a set of metrics, benchmarking metrics, that you're measuring the effectiveness of that engagement against. It can be a number of different things, including quality, including cost, including delivery, including turnaround time. But you really need to have a good set of metrics that you're measuring the effectiveness of that engagement against. You also need to sit down and understand that you've got to do a good job at planning that engagement on the implementation side. Typically that works best if both the players in the engagement have got a fair amount of experience in terms of building that project plan out. And last but not least, outsourcing any function is a pretty significant transformation for an organization. And so you really need to have the right management levels of commitment and skills in place to make sure that if you've got internal resistance, you address it very effectively within the organization. When those four things hit on all cylinders, you typically will have a pretty successful implementation.
Okay, so Nina, let's play off of that. So here's a client, they may do this once every couple of years. Datamark's doing this all the time, right? So what best practices do you employ to make sure there's a smooth transition and a successful implementation?
So with any possible vendor, it's really important to have a very defined step-by-step framework for engaging in any kind of process migration or outsourcing engagement. So we have what we call our evolution solution, which takes it first, it defines 4 key steps. So first you have the process analysis, which is to get in there and really understand those basic needs like Barb talked about. And then it moves to the process migration. For the migration portion, we have a very detailed, we call it our PMM, our process migration methodology, that outlines close to 100 individual steps that includes a lot of tools for Six Sigma, Lean, etc. into that step so that to make sure there's full communication throughout the migration process, end-to-end traceability, everybody knows at every step exactly what's going on, and then that lets you take it into the actual improvement portion, use the benchmarking that you've done, use the data that you've captured to actually integrate the improvements into the process itself so that then you can reach that steady state where you've achieved your cost reductions and the benefits from the migration.
So this all sounds wonderful, but Barbara, you and I know not everybody does this, right? So what are the most common pitfalls or mistakes what do people typically do wrong?
If you take a look at it, I think it's the upfront work that's the toughest part. And that says that I've got to do a great job at saying, here are my goals, here are my objectives, and here are the metrics that I'm going to use to manage and measure success. Once those are in place, I think then the project plan and the methodology that Nina mentioned become a natural and a very logical offshoot. But you've got to make sure you've got goals, objectives, and metrics for success well defined, or you'll never know whether you've done a good job or not.
Okay, and now we talked in an earlier segment about who should be involved in the evaluation process. Who should be involved in the implementation process, or who typically, from the Datamark standpoint, is it the same team, or is it a slight change in configuration?
It's slightly different just because you have to make sure to involve from the very beginning all of the possible stakeholders of the engagement. So you're involving, yes, finance and the purchasing and all of them that were involved in the evaluation criteria, but you're also involving IT and you're involving, both from a software and tech and hardware perspective. You're involving any of the operations folks, all of the different people that might be stakeholders. It's really important to get them engaged early on so that you have those business needs defined early and you're not going to miss something.
So when I had originally met your team months back, they made sure to impress upon me the Six Sigma, right? Just how deep process is in your DNA. I'm thinking that this is where it plays out, right? This is really where it pays off for the client.
It really is, especially in the benchmarking and determining the metrics. All of that is based on data. It's the details of the data. So the Six Sigma methodologies, they help you gather that data so that you're basing everything on the right information.
Okay. Just one more question, Barb, on transition. It's one of those segments that, of the phase, one of those phases within the process that people don't tend to think about, right? They think about up front, buying it, on the back end, realizing the benefits. Is there a ballpark of how much time someone should allocate, or is it just the depends kind of scenario?
I'm going to ask Nina for her opinion. It depends on the complexity of the engagement. We typically will see that at a minimum, people start to experience the benefits in 6 months or less of an outsourcing engagement. But there are some very complex outsourcing engagements that involve mail operations. It can take a longer period of time to implement. And I'm going to ask Nina for her insight in terms of some of the ones that you've experienced.
Any norms that you're seeing as far as what they should allocate on that timeline?
Well, for the first step of the process analysis, usually that ranges, actually for a small function, it might be a week or two, as short as that.
Yeah.
But sometimes we engage, even just in the analysis section, you can look at a month or two. And then as you're moving to the migration, that really is dependent on the complexity that you're doing. Usually you want to build a plan right from the beginning, though, that's going to show you incremental improvements as you go.
Okay. So some of the takeaways I'm hearing is you cannot over-plan or over-prepare, right? Devil's in the details. As Barb, you mentioned before, what you can measure, you can manage, right? And then my sense is the more organized you are and have all the right people at the table, the better shot you have at achieving success with regard to implementation. Okay, well, thank you both, and thank you for joining us.